All right, so we are at the final question. There were some questions that were submitted a little bit after the cutoff point, so just hang on to those for the next AMA. But yeah, we've got the last question here from Agonized Candle. They say, are you afraid of death, and how do you cope with death anxiety as an atheist? People often use the Mark Twain quote, I was dead for billions of years before I was born and I wasn't troubled, but the 14 billion years since the beginning of the universe was only a finite amount of time, and it was eventually followed by life. But after we die, our non-existence will continue forever. How can an atheist live with the terrifying reality of eternal non-existence? Death anxiety was one of the main reasons that I decided to take Pascal's wager and convert recently. I never understood how other atheists were able to face death without becoming nihilists. Thank you for your great content, and sorry for not being succinct to my question. Well, so much for ending on a high note. Thanks a lot, pal. So, I mean, just on that one argument, well, not argument, but just the thought that life is meaningless unless you never die. I don't agree with that. I mean, the idea that you could somehow make life meaningful just by never expiring, like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. You know, life could be meaningful and we die. Life could go on forever and it would still be absurd. Like, those are both possibilities. You know, it seems like you could live forever and it would still be meaningless. You know, like, if your life is meaningless now, why would extending it through eternity make it meaningful? Thomas Nagel in Mortal Questions talks about this, this kind of argument for life being absurd that so many people seem to find intuitive. It's often remarked that nothing we do now will matter in a million years. But if that is true, then by the same token, nothing that will be the case in a million years matters now. In particular, it doesn't matter that in a million years, nothing we do now will matter. Moreover, even if what we did now were going to matter in a million years, how could that keep our present concerns from being absurd? If their mattering now is not enough to accomplish that, how would it help if they mattered a million years from now? So that's in the opening of The Absurd, Mortal Questions. Check it out. First philosophy book I ever owned right here. But yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, if nothing we do now matters in a million years, then by the same token, what's going on in a million years doesn't matter now. Namely, the fact that nothing we do now matters in a million years. If their mattering now isn't enough to accomplish what you're looking for, then why would mattering in a million years change anything? It just seems so obvious that things matter now. Like, if this next meal is good or terrible, or if my relationship is in a better or worse state, or if I'm in excruciating agony or not. Like, I can think of things that matter to me right now, and you're not going to talk me out of, you know, it mattering to me, whether or not I'm happy or in pain or whatever. This essay from Nagel is actually also the first time it dawned on me that chains of justification end somewhere, which has all kinds of applications. Yeah, just this idea that, like, well, look, stuff matters. There's a chain of justification, and eventually it just bottoms out in, like, some kind of brute fact of mattering. So, like, if you're trying to explain action, I think this is the example he gives. Like, why are you going to the cupboard to get an aspirin? Why are you getting an aspirin? Well, to stop my headache. It's like, why are you trying to stop your headache? And it's like, well, that's the point where the question starts to sound dumb. Like, do you know what a headache is? Like, you know, you might not know why I'm going to the medicine cabinet. You might not know what aspirin is. But once you understand what a headache is, then it just makes sense that you would want to stop it. Like, it matters to you to stop it. Like, pain is intrinsically bad. Once you understand what it is, you have reason to avoid it. You know, if you say, yeah, but why do you want your headache to go away? It's like, you're either an idiot or you're asking a very deep philosophical question. Maybe those two are not totally distinguishable all the time. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, Nagel actually writes really well about this kind of thing. But other things I've leaned on, there's this famous quote from Andrewian, who was talking about Carl Sagan's death. She was Carl Sagan's wife. And she just wrote, well, I think she was just speaking, but she just spoke really beautifully about that. And I've just returned to that again and again over the years. Also, I guess Mortality by Christopher Hitchens, you know, especially when I was first, like, in the deconversion process. It's been a while since I read it, but just the concept of a man writing a book about his death while he's dying that he didn't finish, that itself, it's like an intriguing project in and of itself, even without the kind of religious element to it. But if I had to pick one book, I guess it would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Like, that's the one that I've leaned on the most. Also, occasionally, The Gay Science by Nietzsche, which has almost like a scriptural quality to it. And occasionally, Sam Harris talking about gratitude. Or, so like you can find this kind of thing in Waking Up, which is a great book, and also just in different clips online. But what can atheists say, that's as comforting as the Christian story? Nothing. There is nothing that anyone could say that's more comforting than, so, imagine that you just lost someone, someone has died, and there's one person telling you death is an illusion. That person who you're missing, who you're grieving the loss of, they're actually not dead. They're exactly as they were, more or less. Nothing happened, actually. Like, there was just kind of this superficial transition. And yeah, everything's fine. Nothing is fundamentally changed. Okay, so what can anyone say that's going to be as comforting as that? I mean, there's no story that we're going to tell that's going to be as good as, well, in fact, this whole death thing is not real. It's just an illusion. I mean, Graham Oppy brought this up in his conversation with Alex O'Connor. It's like, if you're disposed to argue like Jordan Peterson, which I'm not, but if I were, you could use his own style of argumentation against him. So Peterson says things like, well, you say you're an atheist, but your actions betray you because you're not a rapist murderer. So that just proves that you're not really an atheist, because wouldn't we all be rapist murderers if God didn't exist? I guess that's how he thinks. So it's like your verbal behavior of saying, I'm an atheist, doesn't count. That doesn't reveal what you really think. But you not constantly stabbing people, just you're going through the grocery store, and as you're putting things in your cart, you're just stabbing everyone along the way, that reveals that you really do believe in God. Oppy pointed out that there's this article by George Reyes who said that, like, well, Christians are very sad at funerals. Like, they think that their loved one has not died. I mean, maybe in a very superficial way, but they're still alive. They're in this resort, basically. They're in this happy place, much better than Earth. Yet they seem so sad. They should be happy for them. First of all, they're going to be reunited with them in the blink of an eye. And second of all, they're in a wonderful, magical place. And it's like their behavior doesn't seem consistent with that at all. So if you're disposed to argue like Jordan Peterson, then you can say, oh, you're a Christian who believes in the afterlife. Well, pretty sad at this funeral. Now, like I said, I am not disposed to argue like that. I do this weird thing where I take people at their word for what they say. And, if they think something and tell me that's what they think, I believe them. It's really odd. It's a weird quirk I have. But nobody knows what happens when the physical brain dies. Consciousness is publicly unobservable, so it's not like we can check. Yeah, we can't just observe what happens. But yeah, the physical brain dies. What happens to consciousness? I mean, there's no shortage of ideas that people have. But I think when it comes to, dealing with death as an atheist, I think people just have totally limited imaginations about this. They think like, well, you're an atheist, so you must think X, Y, and Z. Like, you must think that experience ends completely when the physical brain dies, because that's the theology of atheists, I suppose. But, atheism is just the lack of belief in God. And I've always said that. No, I mean, atheism is, it's different things to different people, but it's really just like a negative position on one thing. I think it's the belief that God doesn't exist, or, for most people, that God probably doesn't exist. I know that people use religious mechanisms, I guess, to explain how it is that we live after death. But first of all, you can believe in a soul and not be religious. You can believe in a soul and be an atheist. And if that sounds just confused, like that's just contradictory, then it's like you are so steeped in just contingent cultural categories that you just can't understand like the concepts that are in front of you. The concept of a soul is just an immaterial substance that interacts with the physical body. It's like, oh, well, if you don't believe in God, how can you believe in an immaterial mind that makes a difference to the physical body, and the physical body makes a difference to it? It's like, what? What are you talking about? Like, what do these two things even have to do with each other, other than the stories that people who believe in God often tell involve a soul? Okay, well, the stories that people who believe in God often tell involve electrons too. I mean, does that mean I can't believe in electrons? Well, most people who believe in electrons also believe in God. Okay, so you can believe in an immaterial component of personal identity in the mind as an atheist. There's no contradiction there. There's not even a tension there. There's literally no conflict whatsoever. So it's like the soul is the most important part of believing in the afterlife. I mean, if you believe in a God, then it doesn't matter what your philosophy of mind is, because an omnipotent God can resurrect the dead. Like they can, did I just use they, them pronouns for God? God can raise the dead even if physicalism is true. So, I mean, like, if there's an omnipotent God and he promised an afterlife, then it doesn't matter what philosophy of mind theory happens to be true, or if none of them are true, because God can ensure an afterlife, But if you're an atheist, then there are just different options you have available to you. Like Michael Huemer believes in reincarnation, and he's an atheist or pretty close to it, either agnostic or atheist. Oh, death as an atheist. Okay, so how does Michael Huemer deal with death as an atheist? I don't know how he feels about it, but I mean, he does believe that he'll be reincarnated. I guess that's part of how he deals with it as an atheist. So, and I mean, I'm fairly agnostic about the afterlife. There just seems to be so many options, for us to continue existing. Like there are just so many possible ways it could happen. And because I'm like not sure how consciousness fits into nature, I just can't be certain, or like anything approaching certain, about what happens to consciousness when the physical brain dies. I don't know that experience will end. I mean, I can work out the like implications and entailments of different theories. So like I can be sure that if reductive physicalism is true, then experience comes to an end. I can't be sure that if substance dualism is true, one thing happens or the other. I mean, maybe the soul is annihilated upon death. I don't know. Like substance dualism could be true and there could be no afterlife. If dualism is true, that doesn't mean I'm going to go to heaven. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be reincarnated. Like you have to actually like think through these issues. It's not obvious what the answer is, even if you start just, okay, for the sake of argument, let's accept substance dualism. Let's accept panpsychism and think about the implications. How, what happens upon death if panpsychism is true? Like the answer to that is not obvious. I mean, sometimes you can work out like, okay, on this specific version of panpsychism, here's what happens. But like different versions of panpsychism yield different answers. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I am agnostic about the afterlife. I mean, there's only one way to find out for sure, and I will someday, and so will you. So will everyone who's hearing my voice right now. I just remembered there was a debate between Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris on the one side, and David Wolpe and Brad Artson on the other side, where they're talking about the afterlife. And that was an interesting debate. And Hitchens was also dying when that was happening. With respect to your question, it's like, well, how do I deal with death anxiety as an atheist? Well, I mean, like I said, I'm not sure that I'm going to cease to exist. It seems likely to me, if I'm being honest, because when I'm saying I'm agnostic, what I'm agnostic about is whether consciousness continues after death. But that doesn't really answer the question, or doesn't like take a strong position on personal identity. So I'm saying the way that I exist in some sense is probably going to cease to exist. But arguably, I've already done that like a million times in my life, where like in that like thinner sense of me, it's like, okay, well, in that thinner sense, I have already died many, many times. So not sure it's really a big tragedy. So it does seem fairly likely that I will, in some sense, cease to exist. But perhaps in a broader sense, like my stream of consciousness might continue. I don't know. That's something I really can't be sure of one way or another. And it's not just that I'm not just like a skeptic about certainty, because any reasonable person is a skeptic about certainty with this. I mean, I literally don't have like strong feelings one way or the other about whether my consciousness will continue in some form after the death of my physical brain, because it's consistent with panpsychism, it's consistent with dualism, and it's consistent with Mysterianism, and those are my three favorite positions in the philosophy of mind. Those are the three most plausible positions in philosophy of mind as far as I'm concerned. I see some evidence of an afterlife, but it's not strong evidence. I really do need to look into near-death experiences, because I kind of took a cursory look at it many years ago, made a podcast episode, but I haven't really dug deep into these cases. And, it's so frustrating, because everyone assures you that there's something here, that there's like a there. And whenever you look, it's pretty underwhelming. Like I've never been knocked off my feet by things I've heard. And, every time I have heard something impressive, it's so obviously unverifiable, just so. It's like, well, look, if that's true, then that's pretty interesting. But it's just like, let me give you an example. So I was listening to Capturing Christianity, because there's this NDE documentary that came out, and he had the director on the channel. And the director says, like, point blank, he's like, these experiences, like, they don't happen to Muslims or Hindus where it's like their religious views are kind of like confirmed or something like that. He said people see a bright light, or they see ancestors, family members or something, or they see Jesus Christ. But that's it. Those are the three things people see. Hindus don't have experiences with Vishnu, like Muslims don't have experiences with Allah or Muhammad or something. And then someone sent in the super chat and they said, you're a liar. Like, I can verify that there are Hindus and Muslims who have exactly the kinds of experiences you say they don't have. And the director folds immediately and says, well, yeah, sure, that may be true. but but you can't verify that these experiences happened when they were clinically dead. Okay? Like, he's like, well, we can't verify that they were clinically dead when those experiences happened. What? Okay. So, like, I mean, first of all, if that's the standard you want to introduce, then the most impressive NDE stories for Christians go out the window. And that was affirmed by the other guest that was on Capturing Christianity, who appeared in the movie. He was like a cardiologist. And he says that, like, yeah, there are spectacular stories, but the medical record on what happened to them is like sparse or non-existent. And he's like, when you look at the most impressive case that actually has like extensive medical records that go along with it, where doctors and nurses are meticulously taking notes about what was happening, then he talks about that case. And in terms of the level of spectacularness of that case, it's very middle of the road for like what you hear. But he just went with the best case that has like the most evidence supporting what the claims were in the NDE case. But anyway, this is what I'm talking about when I say every time I look into NDEs, I am not inspired to look further. Like, there's this director of this NDE documentary, and he's like, I converted because of NDEs. And then he just gets caught straight up lying about NDEs, that they like uniquely confirm Christianity. He's confronted about that lie. He immediately admits that he was lying without really admitting it, and then invents a new criterion that he didn't mention that he obviously doesn't apply to his own. Like, anyway, I'm just saying, that kind of thing, or like some other similarly discouraging thing, happens every time I look into NDEs, where I'm like, why am I wasting my time? Like, it's either the most spectacular story you've ever heard with like nothing that would help me as someone who's just reading about it really believe them. Like, anyway, I'm still going to look into NDEs in a little more depth, but I'm just saying, every time I've looked into it, I have not been inspired to continue looking into it. The kind of evidence that religious people will offer of an afterlife, it's not that it doesn't matter at all. It's not that there isn't a range of quality of NDE cases. Some of them are hard to explain. And when you look at the kind of attempted reductionist explanations of the higher quality cases, they strain credulity. So I'm not saying that like of the evidence that religious people typically offer of some kind of afterlife, that it's all totally like we can just dismiss it and not, think about it at all. But of what I've seen, it's not that there's no evidence, it's just, it's underwhelming, especially when you think about, again, people just have a really limited imagination about this. There's a lot of unexplored terrain. And this is part of why J.L. Schellenberg, I think, is one of the great atheist philosophers, because he, at the conclusion of the hiddenness argument, he starts talking about ultimate reality, and he almost starts sounding like a mystic or something, talking about the nature of ultimate reality, and at least alluding to that there's all this space that's just unexplored, And I think the same is true of consciousness in the afterlife and so on. So just to return to the original question of like dealing with death anxiety, it's like, well, it's not like I have a set view on what happens after death. So it's not like I'm sure that when I die, the lights just turn off. That's definitely what happens. Now, when I was more certain of that, I didn't really have death anxiety. I was pretty happy just to be alive in this moment, and things matter now. And I wasn't that bothered. Like I feel like I work too much, but I'm having a good time overall. um, yeah, it just it didn't really bother me. I was kind of like an Epicurian about death. I didn't think that death was really bad at the end of the day. And I don't really have those views now, but I'm just saying when I was younger, I didn't really have death anxiety as an atheist. And I'm relatively way more afraid of death now than I was. I don't know why that is, but I'm just more afraid of death now. And I would love to not die. I do not believe atheists who say that they want to die, basically. I mean, I'm, exempting people who are suicidal and have mental health issues. I'm just saying, like, otherwise mentally healthy atheists who say, oh, I wouldn't want to live forever. That is equivalent to saying, I want to die. So I'm not suicidal, so I don't want to die. I don't understand why people say they do want to die. Geez, I wouldn't want to live forever. That seems like a very plausible example of cognitive dissonance, just the classic, the fox can't get to the grapes and says, I didn't want them anyway, they're probably sour. It's like, well, you think you can't have eternal life, so you say, well, it would suck anyway. Actually, it would be terrible to live forever. You know what's terrible? Dying. Though I will say something that I would sooner become one of these atheists who's just totally in denial about the badness of death than one of these like techno dorks who's like, I'm going to upload my mind to the cloud. And then they're just like, they have such bad death anxiety that they literally deny their deaths, and they say, well, why can't human beings live for 10 billion years, just with better medicine? And why can't I upload my mind to the cloud? Okay. Good luck with that. I wish you the best. And, that to me is just infinitely more pathetic, just like deluding yourself into thinking you're going to upload your mind to the cloud. Like, I don't deny that AI could be conscious, that computers and robots, whatever, could be sentient, could be like something, to be some artificial silicon thing, whatever. But like, that's not going to be your consciousness. That's going to be like maybe a qualitatively identical AI or something, but like, that's not you in the sense that you care about. You are still going to die. Your point of view is going to come to an end, and someone else's, which is qualitatively identical to yours, is going to begin. There might even be overlap, which you'd think would make it very clear that you're not the same. Like the teletransporter case, where it's like you're transported to this other place, but then you don't die right away, and you see them over there and you're like, that's not me. And then you die, and then you're vaporized in the chamber or whatever. You'd think that's when people would finally realize Emerson was right, but they still don't. Even when you put it to them, like, what if instead of being killed instantly when you step into the chamber, you are killed a few minutes later and you see yourself, exiting the other side, and you're like, wait a second, I'm here. And then you get vaporized. And in that moment, you'd think it would become clear that that's not you. And obviously, it would become clear if that actually happened. I refuse to believe that people can't see that I'm right about that. If that actually happened, you would see that I was right. You'd be like, wait a second, that's a clone of me. And even though a clone is me in many important senses, it is not me. Anyway, moving on from things that I'm obviously fucking right about. Death. Is it bad? Yes. I mean, why would it be bad to die now? I mean, one reason is that you're missing out on a future of value. So I can't think of a time when it would be good to die, assuming there's a future of value ahead of you. If it's going to be a low quality, I mean, people have really obvious objections to this, like, oh, but what if it's a horribly low quality existence? It's like, well, then it might be good to die because you don't have a future of value in front of you. But assuming that things can continue, like this, more or less, and the quality of life is decently high, you're reasonably mentally and physically healthy, the environment is not like hellish, then like I can't think of a time when I would want to die. So yeah, eternal life. I mean, you don't have to live your entire eternal life at once. It's just like one moment at a time. Like you just continue doing this, except you can do everything. You can do everything that you're capable of doing. So, I mean, I do have death anxiety. And when I do feel more assured of my demise, in every sense, then I lean on those things that I mentioned, kind of like the books and even just passages that I referenced. But the fact is, we just don't know what happens when the physical brain dies. Though I keep returning to this because I don't want to make light of the point. Like, I do have death anxiety. I am afraid of death. I do not want to die. And I was significantly less afraid of death when I was sure that there was going to be an end. So I don't know if that's related, I don't know if it's like, as I've become more agnostic and not just a certainty skeptic, but like actually kind of agnostic about what happens after death, I have become more afraid of death. And maybe it's like that kind of cognitive dissonance that I mentioned of like, once you think you can get those grapes, then you might sort of be like, wait a minute, they might not be sour. So I don't know if it's that, just like the possibility of an afterlife has made me more aware of the badness of death. But then again, I know people who are relatively certain that when they die, it's all over, and they have horrible death anxiety. And I know people who believe they're going to live forever in paradise who have death anxiety. I don't want to draw any kind of essential connection between this or that metaphysical belief and this or that view or attitude towards death, because I think it's plausible we all just process these things differently. Maybe there is, this like totally intelligible web of beliefs. Like, if you have this combination, this is always what happens. But I don't think it's as simple as, I believe there's an afterlife, therefore I feel this way. I don't believe there's an afterlife, therefore I'm going to feel that way. So yeah, I guess I deal with death anxiety differently depending on the day. I either try to find the meaning that's here, or I try to tell myself, well, there really is a possibility that things go on in some form. Yeah, I mean, back to that point about the lack of imagination, or like the weight of like these cultural categories that are kind of imposed on us, like, well, atheists believe this and Christians believe that. The fact is, you are radically, terrifyingly free as an atheist. People act like there are constraints, and it really bothers me that they limit themselves and they limit their freedom. I just feel like atheism could be a million times more interesting than it actually is. The atheist community can just get really boring because they all think so similarly. They don't really explore the question of the afterlife, in all its like, they don't really traverse the conceptual terrain there. They just kind of think for sure that they kind of know what happens, even if they kind of make some noises to be like, oh, well, no one knows for sure or whatever. They are obviously pretty sure about what happens when you die. It's so boring. You can just predict what they're going to think about every issue just from the fact that they don't believe in God. To me, that just makes no sense. Like, why can I predict what you think and what you're going to say about like a whole range of issues just because you don't believe in God? I mean, it like feels the same as how you can predict that someone is anti-gun control based on the fact that they're pro-life. I mean, what's the connection between those things? Or, pick any seemingly unrelated issue that is obviously connected by political tribe, but not by any like, any obvious rational connection. I mean, atheists are no less immune to that. And that's how they end up with such a predictable set of beliefs, I think. That's at least part of the story. But yeah, just like Schellenberg with ultimism, how we haven't really explored most of the conceptual terrain when it comes to the nature of ultimate reality. I don't think that we've really thought about everything, anything close, like everything there is to think about when it comes to how consciousness could exist in the natural world, like all the ways that that could be, and all the implications that that may have for the afterlife. And, you know, the existentialist stuff that I was talking about earlier that I, you know, can often find myself leaning on when, you know, I am like anxious about death. It's like that existentialist stuff is valuable regardless of how you feel about death. So with that, I think I'm going to conclude this AMA. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We'll probably do it the next time we hit a big milestone, like the 7,734 subscriber special or something like that. But yeah, thanks for watching. I guess if you're not already subscribed, do all that stuff. Give me money. Money now. Money please. Money now.
Money. Money me. Money now. Me a money needing a lot now.
Patreon.com/counter or /WaldenPod. I think I also have like a Venmo or something if you just want to do a one-time thing. The reason for that, by the way, is because even though the overhead for podcasting is like about as low as it could get, it's not zero. And it's just nice to, you know, have that stuff covered. And also just the more that I get from that, the more I can take off of work and spend more time doing this. So, which I already do. I mean, I work 4.5 days a week because of patron money. So the thing is, like, you know, a weekend and like a half a day is not enough to really release a lot of content on a regular basis, but it's enough to give me like a little window where I can work on it every week. So that's why it exists. So it can like keep happening. But if you can't afford it or anything, then like there's no pressure.
Money now.
So with that, thank you for listening. I've been Emerson Green, and I will see you next time.